1919, the world was exhausted by years of brutal fighting. Millions of people and entire cities lay in ruins. Leaders and diplomats from dozens of nations from ever happening again. The atmosphere was tense and hopeful as the world watched to see if a lasting peace could truly be achieved. The so-called Big Four, President Woodrow Wilson of the United States, Prime Minister David Lloyd George of Britain, and strict reparations from Germany, hoping to ensure his country's security and prevent any future aggression. In contrast, Wilson championed an international body designed to resolve disputes peacefully and promote cooperation among nations, believing this would guarantee lasting peace. The resulting treaty was a compromise, but it left many deeply dissatisfied. For the Germans, the treaty terms felt like imposed without real negotiation. Many saw it as a measure of punishment for the government their own suffering and struggles. Instead of viewing the rules as war, the Treaty of Versailles bred resentment and instability. The harsh reparations imposed on Germany led to economic hardship, mass unemployment, and social unrest. Across Europe, new grievances emerged. Turmoil. The War Guilt Clause, a controversial part of the Treaty of Versailles, forced Germany to accept sole responsibility for World War I. This clause was not just a legal statement, it was a heavy moral burden placed on the entire nation. For many Germans, it felt like a national humiliation, branding them as the sole villains of a devastating global conflict. The sense of injustice and anger ran deep, fueling widespread resentment. For the immense destruction caused by the war, but in reality, they crippled Germany's already weakened economy. Factories struggled to keep up with production, and workers faced mounting stress as wages stagnated and prices soared. Germany lost key industrial regions such as the resource-rich Ruhr, making it nearly impossible to generate wealth and reparations. The loss of these areas not only hurt the economy, but also deepened the sense of national loss and despair. In a desperate attempt to meet the Allies' demands, the German government began printing more and more money. This led to one of the worst episodes of hyperinflation in history. Banknotes became so worthless that inflated status again. Families changed. Ordinary people saw their life-saving vanish almost overnight. Economic chaos gripped the nation. Long lines formed outside banks as people desperately tried to withdraw their money before it lost even more value. The new Weimar Republic, already fragile, was blamed for accepting the treaty's harsh terms and failing to protect its citizens from ruin. In this climate of despair, extremist groups on both the left and right gained traction. They promised to reject the treaty, restore German pride, and bring stability back to the country. Paramilitary groups marched through the streets and political rallies were larger than they followed. The reparations crisis deepened social unrest and led to frequent street clashes and protests. Families struggled to survive in impoverished neighborhoods, and the social fabric of Germany began to unravel. Instead of bringing peace and stability, the treaty's financial demands fueled instability, bitterness, and a growing sense of injustice. Anger and resentment seeped into the nation. In the ashes of economic despair, the seeds of nationalism were sown, setting the stage for even greater turmoil in the years to come. The Treaty of Versailles didn't just demand reparations from Germany, It fundamentally altered the very shape of Europe. The victorious Allied powers gathered in Paris in 1919, determined to prevent another devastating conflict. Their solution was to redraw the map, breaking up old empires and creating new nations in the hope of fostering stability and peace. But these changes would have far-reaching and often unintended consequences. Germany was stripped of 13% of its territory and lost all of its overseas colonies. The provinces of Alsace-Lorraine, long a point of contention, were returned to France, while other But the new borders often ignored the complex patchwork of ethnic groups living in Central and Eastern Europe. Millions of ethnic Germans suddenly found themselves living as minorities in foreign lands, separated from their homeland by lines drawn on a map. These border changes, intended to promote self-determination, instead sparked confusion, resentment, and ethnic tensions. Many Germans felt betrayed and isolated. A sense of loss and injustice was common in German society. The loss of key industrial regions like the Saar Basin and Upper Silesia dealt a severe blow to Germany's already struggling economy. These areas were rich in coal and industry, and their loss meant fewer jobs, less production, and nationalist anger simmered, fueling a desire for revenge and restoration. The plight of German-speaking minorities in neighboring countries became a powerful rallying point. Their struggles were used to stoke nationalist sentiment and justify calls for future territorial revision. Many Germans believed that their compatriots abroad deserved to be reunited with the homeland. Politicians like Adolf Hitler seized on these grievances, promising to overturn the Treaty of Versailles and restore Germany's unity. They vowed to bring all Germans back under one flag, using the language of unity and revenge to win support. The territorial losses became a potent symbol of injustice and national humiliation. Protests, rallies, and political movements all drew on the widespread sense of betrayal, driving calls for retribution. Even more devastating war. The League of Nations, President Wilson's vision for global peace, was a cornerstone of the treaty, but the U.S. never joined, and key powers like Germany and Soviet Russia were excluded. Of the League left a dangerous power vacuum in Europe. And authoritarian leaders. The hyperinflation trust in democracy for stability. Extremist promises of order and prosperity became increasingly attractive. Economic chaos paved the way for radical change. Germany's fragile recovery in the 1920s depended on American loans, creating a precarious financial system. The Dawes Plan brought brief prosperity, but everything hinged on U.S. support. The 1929 Wall Street crash triggered the Great Depression, cutting off American loans and plunging Germany into crisis. Businesses collapsed, unemployment soared, and despair spread. The Depression was global, fueling protectionism and worsening the slum. Moderate parties seemed powerless, and faith in democracy evaporated. Extremist parties gained ground, promising radical solutions. Economic catastrophe destroyed the post-war. In desperation, Germans turned to those who promised decisive action. The Great Depression gave Hitler and the Nazi Party their opening. Once a fringe group, the Nazis surged as unemployment and poverty spread. Hitler blamed the Treaty of Versailles for Germany's woes, promising to tear it up and restore national pride. Nazi propaganda painted Hitler as a savior who would create jobs and order. Scapegoating Jews and communists, the Nazis offered simple answers to complex problems. As mainstream parties floundered, support for the Nazis soared. In 1933, conservative elites made Hitler chancellor, believing they could control him. This decision doomed German democracy and set the world on a path to war. Once in power, Hitler quickly dismantled democracy and defied the Treaty of Versailles. He rebuilt the military, remilitarized the Rhineland, and faced little resistance from Britain and France. Appeasement emboldened Hitler, who annexed Austria and demanded the Sudetenland. The Munich Agreement sacrificed Czechoslovakia in hopes of peace, but Hitler's ambitions grew. In 1939, he invaded Poland, finally forcing Britain and France to act. The seeds of war planted at Versailles had grown into a global conflict. The treaty meant to secure peace and instead paved the way for World War II. History's lesson: peace built on resentment and injustice cannot last.